Welcome to Today in Space. We're back for another People of Space segment. And this week, we have an expert in space medicine and health. As we enter an age where more and more humans go into space, to the moon, Mars, and beyond, and even just in zero-G, a better understanding of the wide spectrum of humans in space environments is needed. And that's why we're excited to introduce Dr. Saralyn Mark, expert in space medicine, women's health, endocrinology, and geriatrics. As the president and CEO of SolaMed Solutions, LLC, and its space subsidiary, she advises organizations and agencies, including NASA, HHS, and the White House, on health and space-related policies and programs, something we definitely want to talk about a little bit about because that's exciting. But Dr. Mark is also the president of iGIANT, the only nonprofit accelerating gendered innovation, precision design in the world. Dr. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Yes, it's great to have you. Let's dive in and just start from the beginning. We love doing an origin story for the folks that come on. You're doing a whole bunch of stuff and some really cool stuff. But like, where did it all start? Is there like a moment early on? And what was your journey like?
You know, I think all our journeys start when we're children. There's something that just gets planted in us. And if you follow what's inside you, it just eventually leads you to where you need to be. For my generation, I'm the Apollo generation. I actually got to see people walk on the moon or hop on the moon. And I remember being a little girl growing up in Colorado and looking up at the moon, you know, around the time of the Apollo flights, you know, the mountains in the backdrop, saying, I want to do that too. I wanted to be a doctor practicing on the moon. How specific is that?
But that's cool.
What's amazing about it is that I didn't know at the time women couldn't be astronauts. They weren't allowed into the program into the mid-1970s.
Yeah. So
I was this little girl thinking I could do that. And, you know, fortunately, nobody discouraged me. They encouraged me to just follow my dreams. And it really, that's how it happens. You know, it's not that you set out on a course and you got to keep your blinders on. It's just doing what you're passionate about. And I was fortunate to be able to go to medical school, get to do what I loved in medicine, and then got to apply to be an astronaut, got to connect it to NASA. And then sort of the rest is history. And it's just been an incredible journey all along.
Yeah, as I've been able to do this podcast and talk to people who are in the industry and are providing services for the industry and for places like NASA, like that really is the kind of the story for most folks. It's you end up, you want to go as an astronaut or you're really interested in space, you make a connection, you provide a service, then you're in, and then you find people, and then things happen. Yeah.
Right. And I think, you know, you're hitting on something that's really important, and that's finding people, finding your tribe. One of the gifts that I have now with SolaMed Solutions is that many of the people that I've worked with over the decades, I'm now working with again. We've come together at NASA, and here we are. And it's almost like we go right back into those roles as if decades hadn't passed since we had worked together. And it's, you know, that's really a phenomenal thing because we know each other so well that catalytic energy is going to allow us to do what we need to do to help people go into space from the commercial space side now.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm a space shuttle Hubble baby, right? So I was born the same year that Hubble was put up. And the space shuttle was really the only thing that I knew about space, the space program. And when we think about how things are gonna, I mean, they're accelerating right now in the space program. This podcast, we follow it along. Anyone who's paying attention has seen how much growth we've had in the last 10 years. But that thing, that cohesiveness and those partnerships and team working ability, I mean, that's what we're going to need for this next level to keep people safe and healthy moving forward, right?
Absolutely. I think we have the goal to democratize space. We always talk about it where, you know, there's space for all. We want to make it accessible. But I think what we've done is we've taken the extraordinary and made it ordinary, and it's not. It's just people have worked so brilliantly to make it work. And so you need people on top of their game, people who understand risk assessment and also understand, you know, the challenges of doing this. And as well as conveying, you know, the aura and the excitement and the joy of it. And I think coming from NASA, coming from the space program, coming from the programs that you just described, we can translate a lot of that experience into where we need to go into the future.
I love that. I love that. And one of the things we've touched on before on the podcast, and it's really interests me about the health aspect, and with all these new astronauts going up,
Mhm.
you mentioned obviously that NASA didn't allow women originally, and even today there's still such a limited resource of humans, I guess, to be weird about it. But like we do have a ton of data on these humans, but we don't really have like it was fighter pilots and the right stuff and
Mhm.
it was a lot of military personnel and stuff, but now we're kind of expanding into this new pool of genetics and people. What does that look like for you, especially with your expertise?
I absolutely love it, and I am so excited about it. And you are absolutely correct. Yes, the program started with the military mindset. It was
Mm,
military fighter pilots who were in the program, and that was part of the reason why women were not part of it. Is because one of the prereqs was that you had to be a fighter pilot, military pilot, and at
uh,
the time, women were not. So there was something called the Mercury 13 group
mm-hmm,
of female hopefully one day astronauts who had come in to test, and they did superbly well, incredibly well, but they missed that one part, and that was they weren't fighter pilots, and so that took them out of the equation. I think what we have now is that we want to open it up to everybody, and that means people are going to come with a whole host of medical conditions. Being human, you have medical issues.
yeah.
So rather than excluding out, we're including in, and we're trying to figure out ways to do it. And you touched upon something really important. That's taking precision medicine to a personalized approach.
Mm,
So we're going to begin to understand really the genetic structure of what makes us tick. What are your risks from a genetic component? I
mm,
call it astronomics.
ooh,
And it's a way where people may have different sensitivities and different reactions to different environments, and begin to tailor protocols to meet the needs of the individual so that they can travel safely, and not only that, enjoy what they're doing.
yeah. That's a big part of it, right?
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I think everybody going into space, they love it. It's very rare to find someone come back and say, "What a
True.
horrible
True.
experience! I don't wanna do this again." In fact, most people say, "Let me stay up there. I'm a lot
Yeah.
happier than sometimes on terra firma." But I think what we want to do is make it an enjoyable experience. And for what I call people going up space explorers, because that's what they're
Yeah.
doing. They're exploring new terrain,
Mm,
and we need to ensure that we can do it very safely, as safe as possible,
mm.
because if there's any weak link, then the whole mission fails.
100%. And it puts a whole flavor to the people that you put together on a mission, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of effort from the NASA side when they're assembling their crew. They look at skill sets, they look at how well people interact with each other, they look
Mm,
at so many different competencies and capabilities. I think for the commercial space sector, that might happen, but it may not be, the driver. It just may
mm,
be that you have individuals who one can afford to go,
yep.
who want to go and can make it happen. And then you have to do the effort to train them as a team
Mm,
so that they work very effortlessly because, again, everybody is interdependent. You're up there, and it's a hostile environment, even though we
yeah.
make it look so much fun, that you are very dependent on each other.
Let's talk into some of the things that people are dealing with in space. I guess like what types of environments in space have you looked into? I think like the most common one today is the space station, obviously. But could you give
Mhm.
us a breakdown of that and what to expect?
You know, People don't realize we've had a human presence in space for decades. And you mentioned it. It's the International Space Station, this beautiful, bright object in the sky. And we've had
Yeah.
people from all over the world. And we've had multitude of crew and really a huge, diverse core of individuals who've gone up. Um, and it's been what we call the International Space Station, the laboratory. So a lot
Mm,
of experiments are being done, and it's given us a wonderful example of how can you survive in microgravity
mm,
and in an environment that's got radiation exposure and other environmental exposures.
yeah.
There's a lot to it. And again, because NASA and because of NASA's partners as well, they've just made it look effortlessly
Yeah.
to do. And it's not. It's
No.
very, very challenging. So we translate those lessons into the new space stations that are being designed and going to be built. And I think that is so incredible because these are going to be the commercial space stations. They're going to transport people
Mm.
like you and me up into space.
Yeah.
And not only that, to live, to work, to explore, and then eventually, onto the moon, to Mars, and other long duration missions. So we're at a kind of the twilight year of,
Mm.
um, actually, I don't want to say twilight. I want to say the dawn. It's the dawn of a new
Mm.
age.
Mm.
And, we've seen a lot of our space companies do that with our low Earth orbit flights, suborbital flights.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going to take it to the next level.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And when I first started this podcast 10 years ago or so, and I was still getting my degree in aerospace engineering at the time, and um, at that time, the the idea of NASA having more than just having to deal with the political whims of different administrations going back and forth and kind of using Congress, using, NASA as a football. Um, we kind of live in this age, for better and for worse. It has its ups and it has its downs with the private sector adding fuel underneath the public side of things with NASA. That even though there's all this chaos and the budget cuts are one thing that are proposed right now, but 10 years ago, if those budget cuts had been introduced, NASA would have very little chance right now. And so we've had 10 years of kind of like rocket fuel for the commercial sector. And while it would be great to be 5 years ahead in progress right now when this is happening, we at least have that. So yeah, these private stations are exciting. Um, and if the cost of everything can go down, we'll just be able to do more with what we have. And I think that's been I mean, that was the space shuttle's problem ultimately, was just the expense of it. And it had been I mean, almost 4 decades of
Oh,
operation. I mean, it's crazy to think
yeah,
about.
yeah.
But yeah, how do you see the the public and the private space sector and like where they are today, and maybe some ways that you think they could get together more that they don't?
Well, you're hitting on something important, and that's partnerships.
Mm.
And fortunately, we've had the private sector. So when we didn't have transport to the station, we didn't have to be completely dependent on the Russians. We had SpaceX, and that was really a game changer.
Yeah.
Really a game changer to provide another opportunity to get to the station and not be dependent on another country. And as you talk about the political whims, I mean that's certainly it's been a very very successful partnership,
Mm.
but it does come with some of those political overtones at times. I always see NASA as the crown jewel in the government.
Mm.
And it's apolitical, nonpartisan, inspirational,
Mm.
inspires people not only to dream about going into space, but encouraging people such as us to go into medicine, to go into engineering,
Yeah.
to even go into the arts. That we need
Mm.
to really, be able to nurture it and not put it at a political whim.
Mm.
So I don't think we ever give enough to the agency.
No.
Imagine if we gave even more. And I had the privilege to meet Alan Shepard, the first man
Oh,
to
yeah.
space. He was doing a book event at the Smithsonian. I hadn't even moved to Washington yet. I was still in my medical training, and I
Mm.
came up to him to have him sign his book. And he asked me what my discipline was, and I told him I'm a doc, but I want to go into space. And he encouraged me to do it.
Oh,
And then I read in his book, he said, the comfort level he felt being strapped basically to, a vehicle that was built by the lowest bidder.
yeah.
So that's what people don't realize is that when you're in government, you're trying to keep costs down because
Hmm.
it's the taxpayer money, but
Yeah.
still do it safely.
Hmm.
So I think we have to get that story back into our public conscience.
Hmm.
But we need to expand the funding and ensure that there's long livelihood. I mean, the worst thing that can happen in the space program is you course correct every 4 years. If
Hmm.
think about how long it takes to develop a vehicle or to develop a program or develop a spacesuit. And
Yep.
then you're changing the plans every 4 years. You're never going to go anywhere.
Yep.
So there has to be that continuity. I mean, we were so fortunate in the 60s that Nixon picked up after what Johnson picked up after what Kennedy had put forth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd still say, I think we could get to the moon.
Hmm.
Imagine. Imagine.
Yeah, and I just in like thinking of the alternative world, the alternative universe of like what someone that didn't grow up at that time, every time you talk to someone who was young or just alive back then and witnessed it, I mean it changed the culture. It became we
Oh,
put
yeah,
men on the moon. Why can't we do this? You know, it was like this
exactly.
impossible thing was possible.
That became the standard. If
Hmm.
we can put a person on the moon, we certainly can do it. Or we used to say, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
That was the that we used to say. And I have a brother who actually, is a rocket engineer. So it's I saw what he went through to go through school and to do what he is
Oh, it's
doing. And
brutal.
it's really difficult. I thought medicine was hard, and it is, and
Yeah.
certainly the time commitment, but what he endured to go through his schooling and experiences. And we need all of that. We need all those skill sets.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been, from my perspective, having gone for aerospace engineering, I'm kind of like filtered to see kind of the engineering side of things and how the lowest bidder option can, in some ways, create an environment where feedback and dissent and just the scientific process, the communication can kind of get
Mhm.
blocked up and it's almost shamed for that conversation to happen. But that's the engineering side, I think if the public side is the lowest bidder, the private side is the least paid employee, right? Like it, there's always a balance of it. And you hope that because of the amazing stuff that they're doing, that even though maybe, you know, that the Apollo program was just such a perfect unity for the country. And I know from some of the people that I went to school with that are working in these programs, like the private sector offers this, I don't want to wait 10 years to launch something into space,
Yeah.
and so it does attract talent in that way.
It really does. I mean, think about who the engineers are at Blue Origin or SpaceX or Sierra, any other companies. They
Yeah.
have incredible pedigree. Some of them have come from the agency.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the other thing we have to keep in mind is there's a different risk benefit equation.
Mm.
When you're in the government, you really try to keep things to the lowest risk possible because you don't want to be brought before Congress or, as they said, above the front page, above the fold about what has happened.
Yep.
So I think the private sector, in a sense, conveys an ability to be a little more risk taking
Hmm.
and a little more venturesome. But with that said, I'm going to keep coming back to medicine. We are careful. Uh,
Yes.
and by being careful doesn't mean we have to be slow or a showstopper, but
Mm.
we just have to do it right. And that's why, for me, creating SolaMed Solutions into that space subsidiary where we're going to
Mm.
focus on commercial space medicine, bring in the best of the best to develop the concept of operations and the policies and the requirements and the delivery of care and the educational aspect of it,
Yeah.
and to be able to advise on a whole variety of issues, anything from ethics to telemedicine to some of the logistics of it.
Mm.
Um, and allows me to feel more comfortable that we're going to do the best that we can to keep people healthy in space. And not only as they train, but when they're up there and for when they come back. Because when you go into space, your body adapts. It
Mm.
adapts to that environment. And some of it's not necessarily good for when you come back to
Yeah.
the planet. So we need to make sure we get people back in their shape, into the best shape they can. And then keep in mind, we're going to have all ages and all
Hmm.
experiences and all issues. And I think it's just phenomenal. It's going to be so exciting to be able to work in that quote unquote space.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talked about personalized protocols
Mhm.
and like the future of human spaceflight. What are some protocols or maybe uh, mindset that you go about? Because it's obviously individualized. Um, what are some of those things that you think about or that you offer as a strategy for these companies that are starting to send people up there?
Right. Well, keep in mind, there's something called human factors. And
Mm.
so let me give you a couple examples. That's sex, gender,
Mm.
race, ethnicity, age, different ways that people interact with their environments. There's a lot that goes into it. So we're not just this one size fits all
Right.
approach.
Right.
And it makes it easy if you could take that approach, but it just doesn't work. And especially when you go into the space environment where small differences have profound impact. So what you need to do is understand who's going up, what makes them tick, what risks are they potentially going to face. So for example, if you had a very thin woman who has a history of bone mass loss here on the planet,
Mm,
at risk for losing bone mass in space. She's already coming in at a deficit. So, how do you
right.
develop a protocol to protect what bone mass she has? And then what are going to be your countermeasures? And then how are you going to help her rehabilitate so when she comes back to the planet and is exposed to gravity again, she doesn't break her bones?
Right.
So that's an example. I think, we have a world of biomarkers. Some people are very fast bone resorbers, just
Mm,
it is. So if you know that, then you can be a little bit more aggressive in what you need to do to take
mm.
care of it. There are people who metabolize drugs differently, and
Oh,
we see
yeah.
that here on Earth, right? The precision medicine for that, we do that. I mean, we're hearing, for example, with President Biden, the
Mm,
cancer that he has is hormone sensitive. So
right.
that's going to change the protocol that he may get. So imagine, we translate that kind of knowledge into, how do people respond? Are there certain therapeutics we need to give them? And there's certain
Mm,
nutritional aspects that they need. There are people who dump calcium into their urine. There are ways we can slow that down. So
uh,
there's so many different aspects. Every single system of the body adapts, from cardiovascular to neurovestibular, sensory
mm,
neural, reproductive behavior, everything,
yeah.
everything. So, we look at the individual as an entire being and then be
Mm.
able to develop the protocols and using the most cutting edge technology so that we provide the safest experience for them.
That's my mind was just racing with how both exciting this is, how it must be for you as as a doctor, and like dealing with humans, and also like you need to move with speed, but also be thorough at the same time, and it must be such a uh, I mean, there's so many things you mentioned, obviously, with women, with your expertise and the fact that there is so little, that's such a ground to be
Oh,
discovered, right? Like,
it's incredible. I feel so fortunate that I was able to have 18 years at NASA to look at some of these issues.
mm,
We chaired two decadal reviews to assess how the body adapts to space, looking at it from a sex gender lens,
mm,
every single system. And it's so fascinating. And then how do you translate those findings from what you see in microgravity in space to Earth?
right,
As a endocrinologist and as a geriatrician, working in the space program was just ideal
yeah,
because, in a sense, it's almost like a platform for accelerated aging. And
mm,
not only that, you almost kind of get to reverse what's happening in space. So it's, in a sense, like reverse aging.
yeah,
So a lot of lessons that you can share with the public here.
mm. So and so talking space economy, because I think
Mhm.
the next you talked about the dawn of this next like human space era, the space economy comes up a lot. And I think at least my perspective on it is, and I'm not an economist, but it feels like the space economy is really more of an Earth economy with space-based applications. It's not like it's a self-sustaining uh, like, rockets are going up into space more often and there's more stuff on station, but it's people aren't starting entire budgets on space separately. Or at least I haven't seen it and I would love to see that. So like how far along is some of this stuff for funding of space health on the station? Like what's that like navigating just in general for your industry?
Well, keep in mind, from the dawn of the space program, flight medicine, space medicine was there.
Mm,
And again, there was so much to learn. I
yeah.
remember having an afternoon with Senator John Glenn. He had just come back from being on station. I think it was SDS 97. And he said, when we went up, we didn't know what was going to happen to the eyeballs. We didn't know if they were going to pop
Right.
out. We
Right.
just had no idea. And it was so fascinating because you were truly going into the unknown.
Mm,
So from the very, very beginning, I mean, think about when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, how fast his heartbeat was going, the first indication of sinus tachycardia on another,
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
body. Think about when you're excited about something, how fast your heart's beating. Now imagine you're going to walk on the moon.
Oh my God.
On that, and the history of humanity. So it's really, really exciting. I mean, that was again the beginning, in a sense, of telemedicine, which think
Yeah.
about, during the pandemic, that's what kept everybody afloat. We utilized our telehealth
Mm.
capabilities. And, we're able to do that all over the world, especially in very remote areas. So there's incredible applications. So when I look at the space program, I see it in a couple lenses. What actually is up there,
Mm.
what it takes to get up there, and then the terrestrial application of it, that tech transfer component.
Mm.
And so it's really a very rich ecosystem. I know right now a lot of people, talk about the new space economy and the billions and trillions that are going into it. Um, we've been doing this for decades, and it's just only going to accelerate. And
Yeah.
especially, think about aviation going on a plane in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, people actually dressed up for it. It
Yeah.
was a big event. And getting a TV dinner was like the most incredible thing.
Could sit at a bar. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So this is where we're
That's a
kind of
good
at
point.
right now. So 10, 20 years from now, let's say you need to go from New York to Tokyo or to Australia. Imagine having a faster route, taking
Yeah.
it into space and moving your way over across the planet. So think about these spaceports that
Mm.
are popping up everywhere. I find it really exciting. And I believe we're going to utilize it. We just have to have the commitment to do it and not get
Mm.
diverted and detoured by other crazy stuff that happens.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Could you describe some of the things, some of the differences that you've seen between how women and men experience or
Yeah,
when they're in space, what happens to their bodies?
sure. And we have some wonderful decadal reviews. If you look at the Journal of Women's Health,
Mm.
we published that in 2014,
Mm.
our findings from our 6 work groups. I also highlighted several of it in my book, Stellar Medicine, A Journey Through the Universe of Women's Health. A little bit of a plug there.
Plug it.
Okay. It's a part memoir, part guidebook, and it explores the psychosocial and political environments which shape our decisions. And
Mm.
gosh knows everything today, we see that. And it's been going on from eternity. It's nothing new. It's just we see it 24/7 now.
Yeah.
But with the body, every single system, and as I mentioned, it happens dramatically. So, for example, cardiovascular system,
Mm.
when women tend to return from space, they're at higher risk for fainting. We call that syncope.
Mm.
When you go into space, think about it. All the fluid from your legs go up to your face. The moon faces,
Yeah.
puffy face. Yes, cellulite gets better. You get a little taller, wrinkles disappear. But when you come back to Earth, it all kind of resets back to the way you are. But your receptors in your body say, hey, we're volume overload. So you start to diurese since you're, in a sense, volume depleted when you come back. So we try to volume
Mm.
load, we try to pressure garments. But women are higher risk. When men feel stressed, testosterone, the male hormone,
Mm.
causes constriction of the blood vessels.
Mm.
So women, when they're stressed, they tend to more vasodilate and their heart rates go up.
Oh.
You're at a risk if you're already volume depleted, and even if you're increasing your heart rate, you still don't have enough cardiac output and your brain doesn't get enough blood. So you may be at risk for fainting.
Oh, wow.
So, there are ways we can manage that, but being attuned to that, I think, is incredibly important. I mean, just
Yeah.
think about on Earth, men and women have heart attacks, right?
Mhm.
But the presentation for a woman is a bit different compared to a
Right.
man. It's not that it's atypical. It's not like the male standards, the gold standard. It's just
Right.
different.
Right.
So, we're clued into that. And there's one way just to remember, like clots and blood vessels and coronary artery disease. Men explode, women erode. And so the
Ah.
breaks down into the vessel, whereas men just kind of release all that gunk into it and clot off. It's really
Mm.
fascinating. And again, understanding these differences allow us to provide better therapeutics and screening.
Sure.
Another really interesting area is is the neurovestibular and sensory nervous systems. We used to call it visual impairment and cranial pressure, and
Mm,
now space-associated neuroocular syndrome, and we see fluid pressure build up in the eye. And what we found
mm,
is that men tend to be more symptomatic. They both seem to develop it, but men tend to be more symptomatic,
mm,
and that can cause blurred vision. And the reasons for it, not quite known. It may again be that women are used to accommodate volume changes like what you see through your menstrual cycles and your
mm,
pregnancy and the different phases of your reproductive cycle, so the body can accommodate different volume.
mm,
It's just fascinating. I talked to you about bone mass. Women are at
mm,
higher risk for developing fractures compared to men. They don't
mm,
build as much bone density compared to men. Again, a hormonal connection there. When you
mm,
go into space, you begin losing bone mass very quickly if you do nothing. That's why with
mm.
our astronauts, they're exercising 2.5 hours a day.
It's crazy.
It's it's tough. You
Yeah.
got a lot going on, but you have to maintain that bone and muscle mass. We also look at dietary interventions so that they're not
Mm,
leaching, calcium into the bone. Pharmaceuticals may be another way, and
mm,
we're even looking at vibration and other ways to stimulate bone cells. So, I mean, every single system, and then the psychological parameters are really interesting too. We know men
mm,
and women on Earth respond differently.
mm,
Women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression. Fortunately, only about a quarter are appropriately treated and taken care of.
mm.
Um, but what we see is that men and women do equally well. It's just they have different ways of interacting with their environments and being
Yeah.
attuned to those differences. So it's fascinating. And then there's a lot of individual variability. So, we have to keep that in mind. And I think that's where we just come down to human factors. And
Mm.
we look at the individual, we understand from a population, from a precision approach. And now let's take it to the personalized approach. And that's what SolaMed Solutions can do brilliantly.
That's amazing. That's
It's
amazing.
fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a cool job. Um, so I love your thoughts. None of the political stuff, but the Boeing Starliner astronauts, Sonny Williams, Butch Wilmore. That seems like such a great case study of um like emergent I would emergency like health. Like I know there's planning for this mission could get extended for whatever reason.
Right.
Um, but that felt like it was an Apollo 13-esque like moment for space health. And okay, I don't think the amount of time they were going to be up there was ever really set in stone. It kind of always kept changing, at least from the outside. What was it like for you following that on the outside?
Well, first of all, these are very, very well trained astronauts.
Yes.
And remember, they were test pilots for a new
Mm-hmm.
vehicle. And that's why you're quote unquote testing it.
Right.
You've gone through what you can, but then eventually you have to put humans in there. You have to have a crew to see how well, you interact with it and it interacts with you. So there are a lot of plans in place. It's funny. I come from the place of something is half empty, and I'm very happy with that.
Mm,
People are, it's half full, and people ask, why are you living in that environment? And I just say, if I can plan for everything I can think of, it alleviates my stress. I'm
mm,
prepared and I'm fine with that. If I come into something completely blind, I'm not thinking about contingency and different plans. It makes me very anxious. So
yeah.
it's just, and I think if you were to ask a lot of people who've worked in the space program, they probably have a very similar perspective.
Mm,
So, if something's gone wrong, okay, this is plan B. We'll take
yeah.
that. Versus, no, I can't. I haven't trained for that. So they're very open, very, able to adapt and very
Mm,
resilient. I think what it showed was how well they were trained and how well the crew they were with was trained to
100%.
just absorb them and bring them in.
Mm-hmm.
NASA has an incredible medical team, a great team of flight surgeons and medical officers, and people who knew them well. So to keep them as healthy as possible.
Yeah.
Um, I've often thought, and I don't know how popular this is, but that the crew that needs to go to Mars actually should be older individuals.
Mm.
And the reason for that
Oh, I
is
like that.
and think about it. First of all, radiation exposure, the development of cancer tends to have a bit of a latency period. So a little less concerning if you're
Right.
older and you have it 20 years later versus you're in your 20s and 30s and early 40s and you're experiencing this in quote unquote your
Yeah.
prime. Two, I think the psychosocial component of it, you have
Mm.
nothing more to prove. You're doing it because you want to leave the ground for the next generation,
Yeah.
right? Three, you're just well trained. You've got a whole life of experiences that you can bring with you. And then four, I think it takes ageism out of our
Mm.
society because, you know,
Mm.
we've done such a good job having people live longer. If you go to cemeteries around the turn of the century, you know, people died at 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting. You're in the Boston area.
Mm.
You got a treasure trove of that to learn
Whoa.
history.
We've got some old ones.
Oh my gosh. You know, you see what's happened and it tells a story. And
Yeah.
now, you know, it's just not unusual. I mean, look at President Carter, died around 100 and he
Yeah.
had, you know, metastatic melanoma, you know, brain cancer. And just we have the technologies to keep people alive.
Mm.
So I just think it would be phenomenal. And then probably we could get AARP to underwrite the flight.
That'd be amazing. Now that's a good sponsorship right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
think about it. If you join AARP, you get a discount for your mission. and,
Oh man,
and
your Martian years.
your motion. And I guess the last, the fifth part or sixth part would be you're less concerned about having to come back. You know,
Yeah.
this might be your final journey in a sense.
Yeah.
What an incredible way to do it, you know? Think
Yeah.
about it. You would be, you know, laying the groundwork. You become the first Martian so that your great great grandchildren would actually thrive there
Mm.
as best as possible in that kind of environment.
Yeah. The idea of it being similar to um the colonists that came over from America,
Ooh,
just like getting on a ship and going to a
well,
new world.
world, Plymouth I mean, think about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it is usually hardships for people to do that. You know,
Yeah.
they had religious persecution, or I guess Australia, they took the prisoners,
Yeah.
convicts, shipped them down to Australia. It was generally people wanting to get away from something to create something new. So now you're going towards something to create something extraordinarily amazing for the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think culturally, I think we are in this. We have been in this age. I have a feeling that it's changing, but respect for elders and for experience really
Mhm.
is kind of at an all-time low in the younger generations. And I can tell you, I mean, as being 35, an elder millennial to them, um,
Old guy.
an old guy, um, you know,
That's
I
what,
do see at least some of the youngest generations kind of flipping on that and
yeah.
seeing the experience and actually wanting to talk about it. So I think that from an iconic thing would be really powerful. I think and I talk about this on the podcast, I think space is the setting for our next big moment, right?
Mhm.
Like the space conundrum of the first time, the Apollo era, right? Of how we got there and how crazy the world was, and as space
Mhm.
progress went up, chaos in society went up, and we're smack dab in that right now, and I think we're probably in the Gemini era of that. So I think we still have a long way to go before that big moment, but uh, I do think that like what's happening now could very well set the groundwork for that Walter Cronkite moment, for the, you
Yeah.
know, I, whether those players are in place yet is one thing to be said, but what you're describing is one of those moments that could be coming up. I mean, in the next decade, which is
Oh,
wild
yeah.
to think about.
It would be incredible. And then the other thing is, and we often don't like to talk about it, but you know, there's no risk of pregnancy and
Hmm.
and some of those issues that we wrestle with. If you're
Interesting. Could you
doing a
talk
lot,
more about that? Because that's fascinating.
yeah, I mean, it's an important area. Reproductive health is very
Yeah.
important, and you know, both for men and women.
Mm.
Certainly on Earth, it's very politicized, especially for women's reproductive
Yes.
health.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ethical issues. You know, can you get pregnant in space? And how about, you know, if you're on the moon or Mars where you have 1/6 gravity, what's the development of the fetus? And
Right.
Then, the other is, let's say you're able to take to term, can that individual come back to this planet, when it's
Right.
developed in a different, perhaps by that time you've created artificial gravity so you can train and bring them back. But, you're also being bombarded by radiation and other environmental hazards.
Yeah.
So it's complicated. I had the good fortune to create really one of the first policies in the government on infertility coverage.
Mm.
And I created it at NASA early on at the turn of this century.
Wow.
And it was an infertility policy that still stands in place, and it's for male and female astronauts. Because, we have the technology to do this. There should be
Sure.
no gender discrimination that if one, wants to fly and they have to be out of the queue, that they can also have a family. And
Mm.
again, men and women are, it's a 50-50 equation in a sense for infertility. Men and women are impacted differently, especially in space, but
Mm.
nonetheless, you have to think about it.
Sure.
So, we have the technology to do that here, but let's say you're going to colonize another planet, going to the moon, you
Yeah.
have to think about these issues. But for the first mission, you don't want to think about it. You certainly don't want to think about an individual being pregnant. And then if there's any complications, how do
Right.
you manage that? And then the other thing, and we have to be careful how we talk about it, but yet I think it's important because we've seen it down in Antarctica and on ships, couples coming together.
Yeah.
And then if we're going to make this honeymoon destinations and luxury expeditions and all that, we have to think about these elements of what
Sure.
people do naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you handle that for,
Mm.
30-day mission, but also for the long duration mission, the exploration class missions to Mars? So if you can take that out of the equation, that part of
Mm.
it, that's just one less thing you have to worry about and encounter.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a protocol that exists today.
Well, the protocol, we have an infertility policy at NASA. There
Mm.
is a good protocol. I mean, astronauts are given the option of being on birth control, one to control their cycles. But again, it's not the issue for our professional astronauts right now. But if we're going
Right.
to make commercial space exploration um, destination,
Yeah.
part of our tourism world, part of what we want to do for enjoyment and fun, I think we have to be clever and we have to think about these things.
Yeah. Wow. That's something I'd never really fully considered. That's wild.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because now that you've gone down that path, you're going to be thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's actually something I think important because we can't put taboo on any aspect of our health. We
Mm.
need to be able to discuss it. We need to look at the ethical issues, the medical issues, the legal issues, so that we ensure people are healthy and whatever happens up there is health, it maintains that health.
Absolutely. And especially for like a Mars or a lunar mission,
Mhm.
just the reality of the physics of the situation. Like, if you need new supplies or more supplies, you're rationing now for another person, that's not necessarily a curveball you want to get unexpected. And it would actually be irresponsible not to consider that. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it would be. I think it'd be an interesting discussion. So we have Dr. Paul Root Wolpe as our chief ethicist for SolaMed Solutions,
Mm.
and I think if we were to hold sort of a workshop or roundtable about some of these issues, I think it would behoove us just begin discussing it in a very sensitive,
Yeah.
also proactive approach. What we need to think about, because you cannot be naive. You just can't
No.
be.
No. Yeah, and that's these are the kind of things, the blind spots, if you will, of the old fighter pilot days that were
Yeah.
never really fully considered, that as we look at an inclusive look of we're sending everybody. Um yeah, I would be totally down for that conversation. Yeah.
Well, and then take it to the next level. Elon Musk has talked about, Martian colonies.
Hmm.
How does that work? And
Yeah.
Do we provide, special gravity rooms so, you develop, and then do we have shielding, of course, for radiation? I mean, there's so
Right.
much that goes into it. Coming across the Atlantic Ocean from England to Plymouth Rock, you had to traverse the ocean. But once you got here,
Mm.
you called your town the same town that you came from, and there was still land and sun,
Mm-hmm.
water. It wasn't like you were coming into a completely new world
Right.
and having to face, entirely new uh, territory and landscapes and hazards.
Yeah. Yeah. The colony setup is going to be very interesting, and I'm sure the plans for whatever is going into that are happening now. Like those discussions are happening, and I think as we think about prepping for the future, and as you're this expert, that we want to make sure that your voice is getting out there. Um, the more we can have those conversations now, the more repetitions we'll have with those ideas, and then the better our solutions or troubleshooting can be, right?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to brainstorming.
Mm,
And SolaMed has three pillars. It has our people, our programs, and our partnerships. And we
mm,
work across three verticals: our advisory group, our educational outreach, and then
mm,
certainly the operational. And everything's very integrated, tied together. And I could really see, just bringing together people from different environments, coming and looking at some challenging questions and speaking their mind. There's no right, there's no wrong. We just
mm,
need to play it out to see how things would work so that we're prepared. I also come from the pandemic planning
mm,
ecosystem. I was the civilian medical advisor to two surgeons general, and then certainly to the chief medical officer at NASA and
mm,
advisory at HHS as well. And you look at different scenarios so that when you are faced with a situation, you know how to handle it.
mm.
And you can pivot as situations change because
Right.
you tabletopped it. You're able to maneuver.
Mm. That's I love that you said that. Yeah, there's so much to this that, you just scratch the surface of it and you realize, wow, there's this whole world. Um,
Yeah.
Dr. Mark, thank you so much for coming on. I wanted to leave the floor to you at the end here for any kind of closing thoughts or anything we didn't touch on that you'd like us to touch on. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's been a joy to speak with you as well. I just think for folks that are coming into this, just follow your passion.
Mm,
If you're an artist, follow that. Maybe you'll be an artist on the moon. Not everyone's going to take the same course, and we need to have a variety of disciplines. I go back to the days of Alan Shepard when he asked me what my discipline was. Um, it just indicated to me you can come from many walks of life,
mm,
and you need to bring that to whatever you're going to do. And then I think from the commercial space medicine part of it, we're going to be in an environment of inclusion, so we have to be creative. We're going to have to devise as we go along, but ensuring that
mm,
standards are met. And then we have to ask as a people, what risk are we willing to assume?
mm.
It's a really difficult discussion, but we have to be attuned to it. And I don't want to leave on that note. I want to leave on the note that we learn from every experience. We learn from every experience, and certainly our space program is marked by that, where there's been incredible challenges and incredible highs, and we've learned from all of it.
Mm.
So I'm just excited we're able to do, and I'm just so grateful to be able to work with such brilliant people to help do this.
Absolutely. I mean, this is exploration, like you mentioned
Yes,
so well. Like exploration doesn't come without risk, and it doesn't mean that you need to just take on risk for no reason. You can plan and adjust along the way. That's the whole thing.
of course. Yes.
Beautiful. All right. Where can folks find you and
Well,
reach out?
yes, you can find me at SolaMed Solutions. And you can also find me at my nonprofit, iGIANT, IGIANT. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. Dr. Saralyn Mark, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Pleasure.
All
Thank
right,
you.
folks. Be well, spread science, spread love, and spread science. Stay curious, and we'll see you on the next episode of Today in Space. See ya.